Welcome to the Mike and Allison After Hours podcast with your hosts, mshelah and Allison Haas, talking business with real business owners in the Mid-Atlantic region. Today's episode is sponsored by Advantage Industries. When you need business technology, get Advantage Industries to protect and promote your business. To learn more, go to www.getadvantage.com and schedule your first meeting to see if you qualify for a free network scan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mike and Allison After Hours. I am your host, mshelah, and with me today is the always unbeatable and often undeniable Allison Haas. Allison, how the heck are you today?
I love this. Every time I'm just on the edge of my seat waiting to hear how you're going to describe me. So thankfully, it's always positive.
Yeah, hopefully our audience gets as much of a tickle out of that as I do coming up with them. I often lay in bed in the middle of the night going, what am I going to say about Allison this week? Which is probably too much information for our listening audience. Anyway, we're back. We're so sorry. We did not mean to ignore you, listening and viewing audience. We had a glitch with our last guest. And on top of that, this is a very busy time of year for Allison. So we only have a handful of episodes left to wrap up 2021. But don't you worry, because we are going to bring the noise and the funk. We have a GovCon specialist coming up. We have a third generation insurance owner coming up. And to finish the year, Allison and I are putting together some of our favorite moments from 2021 in a special revamp. But before we get to that, you may remember our last episode we had on Matt McDarby, who has a fantastic new sales leadership book called The Divine Comedy of Sales. And you can win a copy. And it's really easy to do. All you have to do is subscribe to our show on YouTube, or follow us on iTunes or Podbean or Stitcher or TuneIn or iHeartRadio or Amazon Alexa or Audible or wherever you're listening to us today, and drop a comment. Give a like. Say, hey, that was funny. Say, Mike, come up with better words for Allison. Whatever. Just let us know you're out there, because that automatically gets you entered. And in December, we are going to give out an autographed copy of Matt's book. He will mail it directly to you. If you want to be a cheap holiday giver, you could certainly ask him to personalize it to someone else in your family and give it to them for the holidays. That's entirely up to you. We're not judging. But today, we are continuing our theme of subject matter experts. So today I have on Kendall Ludwig. Kendall is not only a dear friend of mine, but she is the president, founder, and principal designer for CurlyRed Design, a branding and marketing company in Oakland, Maryland. So Kendall, I am super excited to have you on the show today. Yay!
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Yeah, this is going to be a ton of fun. So Kendall, Allison is going to take you through the who, what, where, when, how segment of the show. And then when she hands you back to me, you and I are going to nerd out a little bit and talk about branding and marketing. And then Allison and I will do our thing after your segment. So Allison, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Welcome, Kendall. Good morning.
Good morning.
And I think what's more likely, Mike, is that the audience will say, Allison, come up with some words for Mike. So it's funny. I do have a notepad in my phone with a bunch of words in it. I just haven't tapped into it yet. So maybe I'll surprise you all one day. But Kendall, so this part is for you to share with us and the audience who you are. And this is where it's really open to you. It can be personal. It can bleed into professional. Usually it's a combination because the two morph, right? Especially for our entrepreneurs. So how did you get started? Were you always in marketing?
So I was always in art. When I was 5 years old, my kindergarten teacher asked me what, the ultimate question, what do you want to be when you grow up? Mm-hmm. And I told her I either wanted to be an artist or the first female Baltimore Oriole.
Ooh, how'd that go?
So clearly, I'm still waiting for my contract from the Orioles, but all that aside, I guess I was maybe like kind of a feminist before I realized what that meant. But I always loved art, and I grew up in Baltimore. I've done different types of art my entire life. My parents actually met doing a musical. So there's art, in our entire family. I would say we're all artistic. it just kind of plays it out like in different ways. And I went to Towson University, go TU, go Tigers, for graphic design. And when I graduated college, I worked a couple of odd jobs and then ended up getting a paid internship at Polk Audio, which is a high-end loudspeaker company in Baltimore. And I was working for them as a graphic designer. And while I was there, I was doing work for them. I was loving everything I was learning. I had an amazing creative director. But I started kind of freelancing on the side with my creative director's blessing, because I was not feeling like I felt kind of in a creative rut. You know, when you work in an in-house marketing department, and Mike can talk all about this, I'm sure, you basically have one client. And so depending on what kind of company it is that you're working for, that can be very confining. You know, you're doing kind of day in, day out. I was doing a lot of the same kind of work, the same kind of aesthetic, the same kind of design. And I kind of started freelancing as a way to have that creative outlet. I could also talk about all the other creative endeavors I do. I play bass. I was in a band for a while. I was doing theater and musicals and non-musicals at the time as well. But I was freelancing and really, really loving the freelance work. So in 2007, I decided to launch CurlyRed. And so now it'll be coming up on 15 years of business in January. And I started CurlyRed while I was still at Polk, and kind of did both for a little while, and then made a super scary decision about 6 months in and went to my creative director and said, I'm going to try to do this thing full time. And, you know, in retrospect, I had absolutely no business doing that, because I did not go to school for business. I knew nothing about starting my own company, but I liked the idea of being my own boss. I liked the idea of picking my own clients, of setting my own hours, of being able to balance my work and my personal life. So all of that was really appealing to me.
And I think you're one of many, myself included, who just do it. F it, right? Just jump in, right? Why not? And I think that's such a great thing for the audience to hear. Like, you can get started, right? You're 15 years in, so clearly you've passed the markers that are indicative of whether or not you're going to be successful and be able to stay in business, right? There are statistics that say at a year, 5 years, like,
right,
if you're either going to keep going or not, right? And so you far surpassed that. And so you're evidence for people that are listening that may not have gone to school for business, right? I didn't. There's entrepreneur-ish things in my blood. Both parents were entrepreneurs. So I think that you're just proof that you can do it if you want to do it. And I love that your creative director gave you the blessing, right? I think that's so important for our bosses to hear, and our leaders, that when we give people permission to be who they are and do the work, like, I don't know about you, but for me, like, I work harder at my day job because they're trusting me to stay at my day job and still give effort in other areas. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, she was wonderful. Shout out to Jenny Romanelli. We're still, you know, dear friends. And she really, I mean, this was kind of pre-lean in, all of that, but I really felt like she was a champion of the few women that were in our workplace, because we were in a company that was 80% plus male. And, you know, it was an interesting place to be, even though I learned so much. There's obviously some negatives that come with that, but having someone who really supported me, who saw my potential, and as sad as she was when I told her, I think that she saw that this was something that I could do. A few years ago, so I moved actually from Baltimore to like Mike mentioned, I'm in Oakland, Maryland, which is all the way out near Deep Creek Lake. If you know your geography, if you're familiar with the state of Maryland, we're in that little kind of tiny little tip where we're surrounded by West Virginia on 3 sides. And I can talk more about why we moved later. But right before we moved, I was living in Reisterstown, had a home office, doing CurlyRed basically out of my home office. And I was asked to speak on this panel at Stevenson University that was all creative entrepreneurs. And there was this line of people And it was like, I was literally the last person at the table. And there were all these people, peers of mine that I greatly respect. Most of them had actually been in business for less time than I had. But the students, the college students, are asking us questions, and we're going down the line and answering. And it was like, it was so ridiculous. It was like one of these things is not like the other, because they all had these amazing answers that were well thought out, that were like the kind of answers that you want to give students who are thinking about starting their own thing. And then there's me. So, they're like, how much money, how much capital did you have when you started your company? And someone was like, 3 years of living expenses. And I was like, well,
50 bucks.
I was gifted a little money by my mom, who she said, I want you to use this in your business. And if I hadn't gotten even that small chunk of change, which was about 3 months of living expenses, I probably would have waited even longer to go out on my own. But that was kind of the little nudge where I was like, okay, so it's not much of a safety net at all, but I actually do better when I don't have the safety net. Yeah, like I need the fear. I need that fear that I don't have a fallback plan, and I have to just kind of make this work. And so it forced me to do just a crazy amount of networking and not so much cold calling, but just trying to make as many connections as I possibly could in the first year or two I was in business. Like I just went to a ridiculous amount of, networking events and one-to-ones, and just giving my business card to anybody who would take it. It really just forced me to do that hustle hard, because I didn't have 3 years of time to get my act together. Do you know what I mean?
Again, perfect alignment with what you already shared. And again, for the audience, like, just do it. You don't have to have X. I remember when I started my business, I was just coming out of college. I didn't even know what living expenses were, right? Like, what are you talking about? And same thing, like I just had to put my nose down and hustle, and day at a time, right? And then years later, I'm like, oh, wow, look, I did it. And I have that experience to fall back on now and just say, you can, right? You absolutely can. Now, CurlyRed, is that from the hair?
Yes, it's to do with the hair.
I love it.
Which is darker than it's been in a little while, but it's naturally red. My friend Matthew Winter, he's a dear friend of mine. He was a media specialist in Howard County, and we were attending church together. And I was sharing with him that I was thinking about doing my own thing, but I was really struggling with a name for myself. Words are so important. Names are so important. And I knew I wanted it to be something that when people met me, even if they didn't remember Kendall, they would remember my company name. Yeah. And so he actually went to his class at the time. He was teaching 3rd grade, I believe at the time. And he went to his 3rd graders and had them brainstorm company names. And 3 different kids came up with CurlyRed.
Oh my gosh.
And the domain was available. I had never thought of it. And it was like, I saw the word and I was like, that's it. It's perfect. And then everything else, the branding, my brand identity hasn't changed a whole lot over the 15 years. My word mark is pretty much the same. It's just been refined. And then I actually have a pinup girl. I'm going to show you. Here she is. Yeah. And this is actually me. So a friend of mine, Stacy, owns Atomic Cheesecake in Baltimore. Excuse me, I have a tickle in my throat. And she is a pinup photographer. And I went to go work with her. I found her through the city paper in Baltimore. And I went to go work for her and asked her if we could do like a professional shot. And I ended up liking the shot so much that my husband like re-illustrated it to be able to be used in my logo.
Ah, I love that story. I'm actually on the back of somebody's business card in not a whole lot, except some shorts and cowboy boots and a hat and a bikini top. But anyway, I would pull it out and show everybody, but I don't know where that is. So I love that.
Well, people have very different reactions to my pinup, which is kind of like, I have a kind of this vintage aesthetic, which I don't do it's not like that's the only kind of design I do. I just gravitate towards everything vintage, both in my personal style and like when I see something that I really love, whether it's design or architecture or what, like we live in a historic home that I am just really, really into like all the details and the woodworking and stuff. I just love anything vintage. And that's really what made me like gravitate towards pinups. But different people have very different perceptions of what that is. Like I look at it as like a celebration of femininity, and just this neat time that's been kind of captured in this art form. But other people, you know, I've worked with some Christian organizations that didn't want me to put like my branding on their piece, which I don't normally do anyway. I've had some people think that I offer other services than graphic design. And I think different people read their own things into it. I find that women actually tend to be much more positively receptive to it than men. Some men love it, totally into it, think it's super cool. Other men, I think that it's some sort of like, I don't know, overtly sexual, like cry for attention or something like that. So I find it really interesting actually to see how people respond. But again, as Mike, and we can talk about this later, but I feel like really strong branding gets some sort of response, and you want that response, and it's not always a positive one, and that's okay. You're not trying to create something that everyone's going to love. You just want to be memorable and something that's just going to stick out, and people are going to refer back to it later and think, oh yeah, I know her, CurlyRed. So, absolutely. Which I get called that a lot at networking events. People will just shout CurlyRed across the room. They don't know my name, and that's fine, because I will totally respond to it.
Yeah, they know enough. And Kendall, I'm digging your energy. I could talk to you for the whole time, but Mike's here, so I will pass the buck. But I also have to say, my toes are the color of your nails, and I'm mesmerized. I'm like, oh, they're the best.
It's like a mustardy. It's
yeah,
kind of fall.
Those are my toes. My nails are plain, but anyway, we're here to talk about you and your business. But thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have lots to debrief on, because I'm just flowing with things I'd love to comment on. But Mike, I'll let you nerd out now on the branding piece, and this is a great segue. So thanks, Kendall.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
So Kendall, if somebody in our audience wants to work with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Is it email? Is it phone? Is it social? Is it all? Please put that out there right now, and we'll make sure we include it in the show notes.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I feel like the best way to get a hold of me is email. So my email is kendall@curlyred.com. If you go to curlyred.com, you're going to see samples of my work. You're going to see testimonials from other clients. You'll see a client list. You'll see a portfolio. I also am pretty active on Instagram. So if you want to follow me, I'm at Instagram. I'm at CurlyRed Design is my Instagram handle. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely call me too, but I feel like email is the better way.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. So you and I were talking a little bit before the show began. Marketing's hard. Well, let me rephrase that. Good marketing is exceptionally hard.
It is.
And you brought up that you've created a brand, and people throw that idea out all the time, but I don't think a lot of people get it. So for example, Howard Stern is a brand now, and talk about having controversy. Oh my God. Yes. So it's almost better if some of your audience doesn't like you. But what you don't want necessarily, unless you're Howard Stern, is that vitriolic hate from a certain segment.
Right.
So, and then, you know, there's a lot of really bad marketing out there, and there's a lot of marketing myth. So where do you want to start? Because again, we could spend an hour talking on this, but I'm looking to hear your thoughts on branding and marketing and some of the do's and don'ts.
Yeah, let's talk about brand for a minute, because I do think that it's become this thing where people are like, oh, I'm a brand, or I'm gonna brand myself. And I think that it's thrown around without a lot of thought about what that process looks like. And I'm coming at it obviously from a visual perspective. I'm looking at helping people, companies or organizations form a visual brand. A lot of it, I feel like you have to start with the why. Like, why are you doing what you do? Because that's the message that's going to be the most compelling. You're trying to communicate with your audience. Why should they care about you, essentially? So if you're a nonprofit, why did you start the nonprofit? What sort of positive impact are you making on your community? What gets you out of bed in the morning? All of those things are going to kind of form your overarching brand, and then the visuals need to support that. So I always feel strongly there are definitely firms and agencies out there that have a very, we were talking about aesthetic a little bit before, and they have a very certain aesthetic, and you go to that firm because you really like the aesthetic that they tend to create in. They have a, you know, they have this place that they like to create, and they have a certain look to the kind of branding or print design or web design that they create. I feel strongly that people are coming to me because I'm the expert, but every brand or project that I work on, I'm going to take my cues from the client and figure out what makes the most sense for them in the way that they're trying to communicate what they're trying to communicate to the world. So I'm not going to create the same kind of branding for a, you know, nonprofit that's fighting cancer as I would for a law firm, as I would for a musician. They're all going to have different, not only styles and looks, but they're trying to communicate different things. So the same aesthetic is not going to, in my mind, is not going to work for different industries or different types of organizations. So I try to make it a dialogue with my clients when we're working together. A lot of the branding process is that discovery of really trying to drill down and get to their why, and then figure out what's going to resonate best with their audience. So it's doing that work that's I feel like is going to help me create a more effective visual brand for them.
Yeah, I love a point that you just made because you could talk to an attorney, a nonprofit, and a musician, and you're going in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take that a step further. You could talk to two different musicians, and you might use the nonprofit aesthetic for one, and you might use the lawyer aesthetic for the other, because it really is about, well, what kind of music are they? And again, maybe the law firm, depending on if they are, private law, family law, litigation, you might take a rock and roll attitude with one of those firms,
Yeah,
depending. So there's a lot of ways to mix and match that. And I'm guessing at one point or another, you've met Christopher Schaefer, who owns Christopher Schaefer Clothiers.
Yeah.
We had Chris on the show very early on in our recording history. And you don't meet well-dressed guys that skateboard and play drums and drive a 67 Camaro. Yeah. And by the way, he's like 25 years sober as well. But all of that goes into his brand and his identity. So I love that you brought that out. And, when you look at logos, for example, and I'm sure you've seen this, it's all over. If you just Google it, you'll find it on a number of different platforms. But somebody took all of the big name logos and took the company name away, but you still know what it is. You still know what Coca-Cola is. You still know what FedEx is. You still know what McDonald's is, because they've created these iconic brands. Now, on the other side of that, Comcast worked very hard about 10 years ago to improve their brand. So they started calling themselves Xfinity. And there's a significant number of people in the world that don't actually realize that Xfinity and Comcast are the same company. And that was intentional by their marketing department to try and fix a tarnished brand. So there's a lot of different ways that you can go with brand, and it can hurt you and help you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great point. We used to be Comcast customers, and I remember when they rebranded Xfinity and we're like, you're not fooling anyone. But they did.
They fooled a lot of people. I was staggered at how many people they fooled.
I know. And I think I don't think people realize how much money you actually have to spend to get to the point where your brand is so iconic that you don't need words anymore. Like the Nike swoosh, like the Target bullseye, and how much work you have to kind of do to get to that level. But I think that the best way to get to the point where you're going to become more iconic than where you are right now is to create something that is very distinguishable from your competition. So, again, I think looking at your competitors and then trying to do something that's similar but just slightly different, that's not going to help you in the long run. You want to be set apart. You don't want people to necessarily be looking at it being like, oh, that looks kind of like that other person's logo, but they seems like they changed the colors. That's not good. You know, you look like a copycat.
That's the worst, because it just looks like you're trying to copy them.
Right, exactly. You're looking like a copycat, and there's nothing special about yours. So I think that's you know, I'm going to use one of my clients' examples. So if you can see this in the back, I don't know, can you see that?
The tiny corner.
It's a tiny corner bike shop, and their mark is a T-Rex riding a penny farthing, which might be one of the strangest branding requests I've ever gotten in my 15 years.
Boy, does
of
that
design.
stand out.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, the response that he has gotten since launching his brand has been unbelievable. People want shirts with it on it. People want to put that sticker on their car because it's silly and it's memorable and it's just a little weird. And I think that for the industry that he's in, like
Bingo
something
moment.
like that is
Silly,
perfect.
memorable, and just a little bit weird.
A little bit quirky, and you know, that's me. So I feel like we were made to work with each other because I'm a little bit quirky. And when he was like, I think there's some designers that you would go to and you'd say a T-Rex on a penny farthing, they'd be like, you're out of your mind. And I was like, yeah, I see that. I think that would totally work. And he has a wife and 2 sons. His sons are super into dinosaurs. And he obviously has a bike shop, but we live in a historic area. So we're, again, I'm in Garrett County near Deep Creek Lake. Oakland, Maryland is the county seat of Garrett. In the turn of the century, people came here to escape the heat of the cities. So a lot of people from DC, Baltimore, Pittsburgh would come here because it's naturally more temperate in the summers. So pre-air conditioning, people would take trains and other kinds of transportation, old-timey cars, and they'd come out here and they'd stay usually for the entire summer. And at one point in time, right around the turn of the century, Oakland had like 3 opera houses, and it had traveling theater groups. It had artists in residence. It was kind of like this art renaissance in Western Maryland. And there's been a huge movement for a revitalization of that. And so the penny farthing actually resonates really well with this community because there is this Victorian, I don't want to say like a Victorian obsession, but there's like this Victorian movement that's almost happening here. There's something called the Victorian Chautauqua that I think they're going to try to make a yearly event. And Chautauqua is an indigenous people word that means someone who is portraying a historic character. So this is something that they used to do a lot in the turn of the century, early 1900s. They would have people come in and portray like Mark Twain or other famous people of the day. And so we have people come and do that now. And there's a whole Victorian celebration in Mountain Lake Park, which is the neighborhood that I live in, which is about 5 minutes west of Oakland. So there's Oakland and Mountain Lake Park, but we live in like a 1900s house, and there's a lot of just Victorian stuff going around. So that's where the penny farthing came in. And so it really, really, really makes sense for both him as a person, but also the audience that he is catering to.
That's brilliant. I absolutely love it. I want to go back to 2 things I pulled out of the last conversation piece that you just had. The power of words. So we don't make copies, we make Xeroxes. We don't use tissues, we use Kleenexes.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do video conference bridges, we do Zooms.
Hey.
That's probably the most recent one that has gone into our lexicon, right? But if you think about it, there are certain brands that have just done a bang up job of this is what we do is so well aligned with our name that people synonymize them. And I think that's the home run.
I completely agree. And, you know, our firm does quite a bit of web design, and my kind of game plan with pretty much anything, but especially on the web, because people's attention span in general is super short.
What?
Exactly. I'm a big like less is more kind of designer. So I think, you know, a picture says 1,000 words, obviously. So I'm very I tend to go image heavy, but when we're creating a website for a client, I encourage them, what is the least amount of copy you can use to get to the call of action? And I think it works for branding, but it also, carries over to print and web design, because most people, not everyone, but most people don't want to read. If they're trying to find you or your services, your organization, they want to make sure that they're in the right place, and then they want to be kind of told what to do next. So again, you asked me, what's my preferred way of
simple and concise. I love it.
Same thing for an organization. If you are a nonprofit and we're creating a website for you, what do you want the user of your website to do? That's the very first question I ask when we're working on a new website project. What's the call to action? Do you want people to donate? Do you want people to sign up for your newsletter? Do you want people to email you? Do you want people to call? Do you want people to visit you in person? What is it the thing that you want them to do? Because we build the entire thing around that. And the less amount, like I said, the less amount of copy we can use to get them to that call to action, the better. It tends to, people don't want to have to dig. They don't want to have to search. They just want it to be very obvious. Just make it easy for people. Don't make them have to think too hard or look too long. Just give them the information that they're looking for, and you're going to have a better user experience. And hopefully that will translate into more donations, more sales, more customers, etc.
Yeah. So let's work on that word for just another minute. Concise, because I know you can appreciate this. So when you and I met, we were both speaking at the BBJ social media event, probably about 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And I usually get a few customers from the audience as a result of doing things like that. And without fail, there's that part of your LinkedIn profile where you're supposed to talk about yourself. And I always see Mike Shelah is a seasoned dynamic team professional with the ability to drive key revenues for stakeholders in marketplaces throughout the strategic area. I'm like, what the hell does that say? So I tell my clients, hi, my name is, and fill in the blank year, I started doing keyword. I help industry with keyword. If this can benefit you or your business, contact me. Phone number, email. That's concise.
Right.
You're giving people a very clear notion. This is what I do, and this is how I help. And you don't have to be a company to do that. You don't have to be an organization. On an individual level, because I'm sure you've seen this. You look at websites and go, oh my God, I have no idea what these people do.
Oh my gosh, all the time.
Every website.
Yeah, especially like consultants or, things like that.
They're driving
consultant
value for their key stakeholders, don't you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's, you go to my LinkedIn profile and it just says, I believe in good design for everyone. And that's kind of my CurlyRed tagline. And it's broad and not specific for a reason, because I feel like that translates to every area of my life. It's not just my business, but I care about people. I care about helping them communicate. I care about creating, I call it usable art. I mean, that's when I was a kid and I was doing painting and photography, I loved it. But what drew me to graphic design once I got to Towson was this idea that it's art that you can use. There's a practicality to it, but it doesn't mean that it can still be beautiful. And that's what I really like.
Concise,
again, I feel like that makes me a little bit different than some other designers that I know, because I think there's some designers that are all about utility, which obviously, like, it's got to be usable. It's got to be functional. It's got to be easy to navigate. And I really do try to design with that in mind, but it can be beautiful at the same time. And the beauty is what's going to be compelling. The beauty is what's going to keep people looking for longer. And beauty could be quirkiness, like with the bike shop. It could be beautiful photography. It could be a beautiful video of someone explaining, why this organization helped me, like a beautiful testimonial. I mean, beauty can mean a lot of different things in different contexts, but I think that everything that I create, at the end of the day, I want it to be functional and beautiful. And I feel like that's possible.
Well, Kendall, this has been nothing short of fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. Allison, your parting thoughts before we say goodbye to Kendall?
Yeah, this was super fun. And while you two were talking, and I'm sure Mike and I will tease it apart, all I could think of, like, who and what are you trying to attract, right? And that can be your life life motto, life brand, your intention, right? Who and what am I trying to attract? And I think that's so important when you're trying to put yourself out into the world, right? Who and what are you trying to bring back, right? So
Yeah,
that's
and
good.
I guess before I go, I'd love to just touch on the fact that, when we moved out here 5 years ago because we wanted to change, we wanted a better quality of life. And what I was pleasantly surprised about is that by surrounding myself with beauty, by getting outside, by being in nature, by really appreciating this beautiful house that we had found, by looking for little like moments of beauty all day long, it has seeped into my work, I feel like, even more, without a whole lot of effort on my part. It's like the more time I spend making sure that I appreciate all the things that I've been blessed with and all the beauty that is around me all the time, the more I feel like I'm able to like kind of harness that beauty and then put it into my work. So I feel like it's just made me a better designer. It's made me be able to do my job better, and to serve my customers better. So I'd encourage, anyone who's watching this to, now is the time of technology where, live where you want to live, build your life, your work and your life in a way that's going to serve you and your family well, because that's going to be the best you. And then if you're the best you, you're going to be able to do your best work, and you'll be able to experience that joy and gratitude, which I feel like is only going to stand to flow over to help you do whatever it is you're here to do. So.
Amen. Perfect way to end the show.
Yes,
We're
absolutely.
done.
Kendall Ludwig, founder, president, principal designer at CurlyRed Design. Thank you so much for joining Mike and Allison After Hours.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me, and I will see you soon. Thank you.
It's been a blast.
Okay, bye.
Wow, there
I
is
love
so
that.
much that we can take from that conversation. And one thing, I could have spent an entire hour just talking to Kendall, but she used a word which is quirky. And I want to translate that to something that you and I talk a lot about, which is human. That when we are working with a client, that human element is what helps solidify the opportunity.
And that I will say too, I could have talked to her for a long time as well. What continued to come across was her humanness, right? So yes, when you hear labels like president, founder, these big words with power, it's easy to be intimidated and forget that that's actually just another person. And her energy just reeked of humanness and humility and gratitude, right? So at the end, of course, she started to touch on the spiritual realm and EQ stuff that we talk about all the time, right? Like being connected with what's outside and tapping into connection, right? Which then becomes an extension of her and an expression of her, and just makes her work that much more palpable and tangible and powerful and her. So yeah, quirky, human. I think as I continue in my profession, I'm getting more comfortable just being me, and that I don't have to put on a show for anybody, and I don't have to pretend to have the answer if I don't have it, or say yes when the answer is no. And so I think for business leaders, entrepreneurs, and salespeople, just being human, especially in today's world where we are cut off with screens, is so important and vital.
Yeah, and it's something that you and I talk a lot about, but it's about being your authentic self. And my wife will often be sitting in the next room hearing me talk to a prospective client or one of my colleagues, and she'll remark to me afterwards, "I can't believe you just said that." And my response is always, "Was it untrue?" She's like, "Aren't you afraid of offending people?" I said, "If I was afraid of offending people, I couldn't be in sales."
Right.
Because, and you know this, that when you talk to a prospective client, they're often very comfortable with the status quo. They're very okay with things being okay. And unless you're holding a gun to their head, they don't like to make changes.
Right.
So you have to move them off that comfortable block, and you have to say things that could very well offend somebody. Now, you don't go, hey, dummy, why didn't you do this? But you need to bring things up to people and they go, I never thought of that, but you're absolutely right.
Right. The risk of not changing, right? So I have a closing call this afternoon. It's like the 5th one, but that's beside the point. And the person leading me to this call is like, you need to sell the fear, right? The fear of not doing it, right? So what happens if you don't change? And I know personally, when I get to a place in my life where staying the same is more painful than changing, I'm more apt to do something where, in business, we don't have to wait that long. Like, you don't have to get a fine or an audit or whatever, right? With you and I, that we talk about the IT stuff coming up and the HR stuff. Like, we don't have to wait until the fire is blazing. Like, just trust the process. And the book that I just finished, right? How to stop worrying and live life. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Put it on paper, right? What are you truly worried about? Like, put that on paper. So
So for our viewing and listening audience, Allison and I were texting and emailing back and forth yesterday, as we so often do, talking about clients and accounts. And I had another call with a client that had verbally agreed to sign on with us a week and a half ago, which is great. But they haven't signed it yet because they have a couple niggling details that they want to get right. And for a sales professional, it can often be difficult to appreciate that. To say, look, just, sign the damn paperwork. But
what is wrong with you? Just sign. Yeah. Don't you know that you're like, you are in my head all the time right now? Yeah.
You're literally the only thing I think about. But that it's an important point to be able to sit in the customer's chair as often as possible. And if we look at that as a 100-point scale, I think most salespeople will sit in the chair maybe 15 or 20 times. But when you start to get to sitting in the customer's chair 55, 60 times, where it's more in their chair than in yours, it enables you to do a better job of bringing the account to close. And I've never been a fan of the word closing in sales. I use it somewhat generically because I think it's universally understood. But if you are doing the process correctly, signing the contract is the natural conclusion of the process. And I think a lot of salespeople don't understand it. So I know this deal is going to happen. This customer just has some particulars that are unique to them, and that's okay. I'm here to help them through it. That really is. They've already said yes. I just need to help them get those last couple things so that they can comfortably sign the agreement, because nothing is worse than a customer signing a contract under duress and then having buyer's remorse later. And anybody listening to this or watching has experienced that at one point or another in their sales career.
I appreciate this reminder because I just closed a really big deal. Closed and now whatever, sold it, whatever. I have a new client and it was a big undertaking and it was very stressful to say the least. Everyone in my office knows all about it. And I lost perspective of their process and why they asked so many questions, why they needed so many details, literal penny details. And it wasn't until after we got a little bit further into the process, because there's a lot of work to be done, even once they say yes and they sign and they pay and all those things. And I'm like, these people have hundreds of people under their guidance and direction. Like, this does not just affect them, it affects those people and their families, and they have to make sure they articulate it correctly and that it is exactly what I'm saying that it is. And I had moments of just like, oh my gosh, we've gone over this 5 times already, right? Where I really did. I lacked the perception and the ability to sit in that seat and say, yes, but this 10th time is what she needs, they need to know that this is really what they say it is. And also because their former vendor experience was so shitty, right, that they were nickel and dimed and overpromised and grossly underdelivered, that really what I'm saying, and I know to be true from the service side, is too good to be true. Like it really sounds that way, and it's not, but there's a reason they're asking the questions that they're asking. So thank you, Mike, for that reminder. Going into this value development call I have later, like why they are in the place that they are, because they've had the experience that they've had thus far, so and I'm reading the linchpin, right? And it's about like sitting on the other side of the table. And also I will say, when we do that, when we get a no or not yet, it's easier to understand why, instead of taking it personally and as an offense to me and you're not going to allow me to hit my goal, whatever. Like it's not right for them, or this is how they do their business, and it's not for everyone. So I will say there's huge value in sitting on the other side of this table for all reasons.
Yeah, and I want to wrap up with addressing something you just said about no or not now, because there's a balance there that as sales professionals that we have to do. Is it a qualified no? Right? Because a lot of times, I would say the majority, somewhere around 80%, when we get a no, it's an unqualified no. It's a we're fine. I know you're not. So you push back on that. And that's your opportunity to educate the client a little. Say, if you can tell me A, B, C, then yes, you are fine. But 80% of the time, I know that's not the case. And that's one of the strategies that I've adopted into my prospecting is when somebody says to me, we're fine, I respond back. I say, hey, Bill, thanks for getting back to me. I have to push back on your statement. If by you're fine, you mean ABC, then I agree with you. If you can't tell me yes to A and B and C, then the answer is no, you're not fine. And I have a line that I came up with is I can say with 80% accuracy that you're not fine. Can you tell me with 80% accuracy that I'm wrong? Now, that's a big push. And I've had a few people get offended, but it's all about getting somebody off their spot and forcing them to rethink. And I've had a few people, tell me to go pound sand, and that's how it's going to happen.
Part of the job.
But I get some people that go, "Oh, you're right," and that's when you can truly start to help. When you can start to point out things that they hadn't thought about. So, Allison, your parting thoughts. This was a fun episode. I loved having Kendall on the show.
Yeah, this was great. I love the personal connection, but she was just a lovely way to start the morning. I always say I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to share and learn and talk to people and continue to stay open, right, to things that I know but forgot, but things that I don't know. So thank you.
You are welcome, and hopefully our audience felt the same way today. So for Allison Haas, I am Mike Sheila. Thank you for listening to Mike and Allison After Hours. And remember, folks, people helping people. It's powerful stuff.
Thank you for joining Mike and Allison After Hours. Tune in next time for another great business owner sharing valuable industry ideas. Want to be a guest on our show? Contact us at answers@getadvantage.com.